They cuffed my wrists with a smile. Not the cruel grin of a psychopath, the practiced, pleasant smile of someone who's perfectly comfortable doing terrible things in public. He stood in the doorway of my office, a cup of coffee steaming in his hand, and mouthed the words I'd seen in 1,000 thrillers. "I'm so sorry, they'll understand." Then the uniformed men read me my rights like it was a bedtime story. He'd arranged it down to the props. A forged receipt for a bribe, a rental keycard slipped into my desk, a witness who'd seen me leave the building with a fat envelope. There was even a fake email trail, a clumsy string of forwards that any halfway competent investigator should have smelled as staged. But competence is expensive, and influence is cheaper. They led me past my team, faces glazed with the same shocked disbelief they'd been coached to show, past the reception where my picture had hung as Employee of the Month. I mouthed one name as the doors closed. Marcus. He lifted a hand in sickly, sympathetic acknowledgement, as if we were both on the same side of some awful misunderstanding. He'd smiled at me that morning and told one of my top clients, "I'll take this one from here." That smile would now be a mask on network morning shows, earnest, apologetic, indignant at the injustice. The bail was set high. The charges were heavy. The headlines arrived before my lawyer did: executive arrested in fraud scandal. The office went quiet like a room at the end of a funeral. Friends vanished. People who had once called me for coffee emailed to ask, "Are you okay?" as if the polite distance would protect them from the stain. At first, anger burned bright and uncomplicated. I screamed, I cried, I cursed his name until my throat ached. But fury without a plan is merely noise. I turned my fury into patience. Prison is not what the movies show. It is waiting with structure, meals at the same time, lights out at the same time, and 1,000 small humiliations that teach you where power lives. But it taught me other things, too. Who is truly useful, who keeps promises, and how a single moment of leverage can shift a lifetime of advantage. My first ally arrived disguised as a visiting pastor who liked to read business magazines in the visitor's room. He passed along a note in the margins of a hymn sheet. "Call Caroline. Ask about the archived tapes." Caroline was my assistant. She had been the one who told my lawyer, with eyes flat as river stones, that she'd come forward because she could no longer keep the lie. The pastor had been a friend of a friend. Information travels in strange, holy routes. Caroline did not abandon me. She had watched from the inside how Marcus had slowly replaced me, steering clients my way, subtly altering meeting times so I missed critical calls, slipping notes into my inbox that redirected projects. She'd seen the staged evidence that had been planted in the accounting folder, a printout with ink that didn't match our office printers, a figure on a ledger that made no sense. She'd kept copies. We began a quiet exchange, a folded napkin at a diner, a flash drive hidden in a condolence bouquet, a library book with dog-eared pages. She smuggled me emails, meeting minutes, and a single voice memo she'd recorded months earlier where Marcus and an unknown man laughed about rearranging the chessboard. The clip was small, nothing incriminating in court terms, but it showed pattern and motive. It showed intent. I needed more than pattern. I needed spectacle. If he could orchestrate my downfall with a press release, then the only language he would understand was the one broadcast live. Getting out took an ugly combination of legal maneuvering and a benefactor who owed me a favor, a quiet woman who'd made a fortune buying distressed companies and had once sat on my board. She fronted bail on 2 conditions. First, I had to keep my hands clean until the truth was in the light. Second, that I let her take the stage when the curtain lifted. I agreed. We were both tired of the men in suits deciding outcomes in hotel lobbies. Freedom tasted like iced air. Outside, the city smelled of late summer and hypocrisy. Marcus greeted me at the gate with the same bland compassion he'd worn at the door of my office. "We'll clear this up," he said, his voice smooth. "I'm sure it's a misunderstanding." He meant, of course, that he would continue to steer the narrative. He had the press on speed dial, the op-eds already drafted. I assembled my own ragged team: Caroline, the pastor's nephew who worked in local news and loved digging into the seamier corners of finance, my old intern who knew how to scrape metadata from deleted files, and the benefactor's contacts, people with keys into satellite trucks and broadcast feeds. We moved in secret, like thieves of a different sort. We stole proof, not things. We found the ledger. It had been lost during discovery, filed under shredded receipts at Marcus's old firm. The intern pulled it from a storage locker using a receipt Caroline had bribed a janitor to save. It had line items that corresponded to the dates I'd been absent, payments made to shell companies with names that read like bad metaphors, Nightshade LLC, Curtain Call Partners. The entries were dull, bureaucratic, the kind of detail that makes excellent evidence because it's boring enough to be true. But records are not news until somebody says them aloud in front of millions. The plan was audacious and dangerous. Marcus had agreed to a primetime interview on a network everyone in the city watched. He was going to walk through the narrative he'd helped build: scandal, remorse, how he had always loved the firm like a father loves a child. He planned to speak from a leather chair while cameras made his conscience look noble. We bought the same time slot. Not by force, we legally acquired advertising and sponsorship minutes surrounding the broadcast. We rented a nearby studio and lined up a live feed that could interrupt the network's satellite if their control switch was misconfigured, and we prayed that the city's techs would be lazy enough to leave a door unlocked. We couldn't hack, we didn't need to. The television business runs on layers of trust and overlapping responsibilities. We exploited their habit of assuming everyone else on the chain was competent. The night of the broadcast, my heart thudded a slow drum. I sat in a booth with Caroline and the cameraman, the benefactor's hand warm on my back. On the studio monitors, Marcus smiled into the lens, practiced sympathy in his jaw. He was suave. He was dangerous. He was convinced of his invulnerability. When the network cut to commercial, we ran our minute. The feed was a simple, brutal collage: ledger pages flowing across the screen, voice memos of Marcus laughing, bank transfers traced in red lines, emails that showed he'd suggested pressing charges before any investigation had begun. We let the footage breathe. No music, no flourish. We let the arithmetic of evidence speak like a verdict. Then, as the studio clock ticked, we switched to live. The camera showed me in a single frame, unlit and ordinary, not the avenging phantom the tabloids had painted. I spoke slowly, giving them time to process each word. "My name is Anna Reed," I said. "They arrested me so one man could steal my clients, my reputation, my life. Tonight, I am going to tell you what he took, and why." The host on the network froze, mid-question. A dozen producer phones lit up in a panic. The network tried to cut the feed. For 30 seconds, their fingers were slower than our convictions. We let the ledger roll. We let Caroline play the memo where Marcus had said, "We crush her now," while the market's distracted. We showed the bank transfers that matched his signature. We played a voicemail where he'd urged an executive to make the narrative clean. By the time the network wrestled the air back, the damage was already aired. Clips splashed across every channel and phone. Social media, which had once helped convict me, now convulsed with a different fury. Investigative reporters that had ignored my emails for months suddenly had their inboxes filled with corroboration. Regulators, embarrassed that a scandal had blossomed under their noses, opened inquiries. Marcus's PR firm flailed. The wife who had smiled next to him at charity galas unfollowed him on every platform. He surrendered to the cameras that week with a different sort of smile, the brittle one that men wear when the scaffold is approaching. He made statements about mistakes and poor judgment. He called his own behavior inexcusable. Authorities at last had cause to look further. What had been a scripted fall from grace was now an unraveling tapestry. Afterward, I stood on my apartment roof and watched the city exhale. People asked if I felt vindicated. They wanted triumphant smiles, slow-motion freedom. But the truth is not triumphant in that way. I felt hollow and relieved, like someone who's had a tumor removed and now must figure out how to live with the scar. Some nights I replay the live feed in my head, the stillness right before the network cut, the flinch on Marcus's face when the ledger scrolled by. I wonder about the cost, the colleagues who lost their jobs, the career I will have to rebuild, the trust that will never be the same. Justice, I learned, is not clean. It is a set of compromises and a willingness to stand where the light is blinding. Marcus asked for mercy in court. He offered to testify against others who'd helped him. He tried to make deals that would keep him out of the papers long term. The regulators demanded fines, and the board was reshuffled. The firm I loved needed me to return not as a conqueror, but as a steward. I took the job because the people I could help had paid a price for his lie. I did not relish watching him fall. I only wanted him to answer for what he had done. Revenge had been a language I learned in waiting. Justice became something I had to translate back into law, into motions, into audits that would prevent another smiling man from rearranging a life on a whim. Months later, a junior reporter asked me if I would do it again. Lie, bait, expose. I told her the truth. I would do whatever it takes to stop a lie from destroying someone else. But I would never trade my freedom for theater again. There is a thin, dangerous line between exposing truth and becoming the spectacle. I had walked it, and the light left a scar.